His ribs pressed hard against his matted fur, a map of hunger no one bothered to read. He shivered. Not just from the biting wind blowing through the alley, but from the memory of the boot that had struck him in the side just an hour earlier, sending a sharp pain that made him whimper. To the world, he was invisible. Worse than invisible, he was a nuisance, a filthy mutt to be kicked, starved, and cursed. Every human he encountered saw only filth. He didn't know that just a few feet away, on the main sidewalk, his only ally in the world, a 7-year-old boy named Leo, was also starving. Starving for food, starving for kindness, and trapped in the same cold, uncaring world. The dog, known only as pest to his neighbors, had no way of knowing that his life was about to collide with the boy's in a way that would change everything. And he certainly didn't know that within hours, his desperate loyalty would be put to the ultimate test, a test involving a single plate of food, an act of cruelty so shocking it would turn his stomach, and a twist of fate so profound it would bring a millionaire bank president to his knees. What happens next will shock him. The concrete was cold. That was the central fact of his world. It was a living entity of indifference. It was a flat, gray slab of nobody cares that seeped through the thin, worn denim of his jeans, seeped through his skin, his muscles, and lodged deep in his bones. This cold was more than the weather. It was a statement. At 7, Leo knew more about the different textures of cold than any child ever should. He knew the sharp, biting chill of the wind that blew around the corner of the building, a wind that seemed to distinguish him, whisper reminders of his isolation. He knew the damp, creeping chill of the small basement room where he slept, a room that smelled of mold and regret, a room where sunlight never reached the floor. Above all, he knew the emotional cold. He knew the icy cold of his Aunt Sandra's gaze when he accidentally spilled a drop of water on her kitchen floor. He knew the icy silence of his Uncle Jonas, a silence always louder and more menacing than his screams. He knew the cold, hard emptiness of his own stomach, a near-constant feeling, a gnawing reminder that he was less a part of this family and more like a piece of furniture they resented having inherited. But this cold right there, sitting on the sidewalk of a busy street that didn't know his name, was the cold of profound and absolute loneliness. It was the cold of invisibility. Leo watched the world pass by like a blur, a watercolor painting left in the rain. Cars sped past, a metallic river of anger and impatience. He heard the screech of tires on asphalt, the distant blare of a horn, the rhythmic, low rumble of a car that didn't even slow down. People, adults, hurried along the sidewalk. They were giants in a hurry. Their faces were immersed in the bright blue light of their cell phones, their ears plugged with white plastic earbuds, their minds a million miles away, lost in spreadsheets, shopping lists, and weekend plans. They walked around him. Sometimes they stepped over his outstretched legs without even looking down, their expensive sneakers inches from his face. He was an obstacle. A crack in the sidewalk. A piece of trash to be avoided. Across the street, a family was leaving an ice cream shop. The father, a tall man with a gentle laugh Leo could hear even over the traffic, placed his little girl on his shoulders. The girl squealed with joy, her pink dress fluttering, her little hands buried in her father's hair. She held a cone full of strawberry ice cream, and she was safe. She was loved. She was seen. Leo had to look away. He squeezed his eyes shut so tightly that patches of color appeared behind his eyelids. He swallowed the hard, painful lump that formed in his throat, a lump that felt like swallowing glass. It was a ghost haunting the edges of his own life, a life he hadn't asked for, a life that seemed determined to forget he existed. He pulled his knees tight to his chest, wrapping his thin arms around his shins, making himself as small as possible. Maybe if he were small enough, he would disappear completely. Maybe that would be better. He buried his face in his knees, his jeans smelling faintly of dust and the strong laundry detergent his aunt used. He told himself not to cry. Crying was weakness. Crying meant he was bothering someone. Crying, as his Uncle Jonas always reminded him with a growl, solved nothing. Crying only made things worse. Then he held his breath, counting the cracks in the asphalt beside his foot. 1, 2, 3, 4 big ones. 7 small ones. Then, he felt something. It wasn't a sound. The city was too noisy for that. It was a presence. A shift in the air beside her. Then, a touch. It wasn't the hurried, impatient shove of a stranger. It wasn't her uncle's angry grip. It was a nudge. It was gentle. It was hesitant. And it was damp. Leo looked up, startled, his eyes wide and clouded with tears he refused to let fall. He blinked, focusing. Standing before him, just a foot away, was a dog. But this wasn't a dog like the one the girl across the street probably had, not a clean, furry creature with a shiny collar and a shiny leash. This was the neighborhood mutt. This was the other invisible thing on this street. His coat was a tangled mess of brown and black fur, covered in mud, thorns, and despair. One of his ears drooped permanently, covering one eye, while the other stood at nervous, trembling attention, twitching with every distant siren, every slammed car door. He was thin. He was so painfully thin that Leo could count every rib under his skin, a high-pitched xylophone of hunger. Scars marred his muzzle, testaments to fights for scraps, to a life lived entirely on the defensive. He trembled, a constant, faint vibration of fear and hunger. The neighbors, the same adults who passed Leo by without seeing him, saw this dog. Oh, they saw him. They yelled at him. They threw rocks at him from their balconies. They hosed him down, even in the cold, cursing him when he tried to take shelter under cars. They called him a pest. They called him a worm. They called him a filthy mutt. They saw a disease, a threat, a nuisance. But Leo saw something else. He looked beyond the matted fur and the visible bones. He looked beyond the scars and the trembling. He looked directly into the dog's eyes. And he saw himself. He saw haunted eyes, lonely and scared. He saw eyes that understood what it meant to be kicked when you were already on the ground. He saw eyes that understood what it meant to be hungry, not just for food, but for someone. Anyone. A kind hand. A kind word. He saw eyes that, like his own, were just trying to survive until sunset. Leo remained completely still. He forgot to breathe. His heart, which normally felt like a frozen bird in his chest, gave a painful beat. The dog Leo had secretly called him Buddy in his mind, a name he'd once heard in a cartoon, a name that meant friend whine softly. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was a tiny sound that seemed to ask a question, are you like the others? Buddy took a hesitant step forward, his claws clicking nervously on the asphalt. Then another. He was scared. His entire body was coiled, ready to spring at the slightest sign of aggression. He expected a kick. He expected a scream. He expected a rock to fly past his head. He had learned, through painful experience, that humans were a source of unpredictable violence. This small human was just sitting there, but humans, small or large, were dangerous. However, this one smelled different. He smelled of soap and loneliness. He didn't smell of the beer and anger that usually came from large ones. Instead of screaming, Leo just watched him. He didn't move a muscle. He just looked into the dog's eyes, and for the first time, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the mutt advanced. Its belly was so close to the ground it almost scraped the concrete. It moved inch by inch, its nose twitching, testing the air, gathering information. It was close now, so close that Leo could smell the dust on its fur. The dog stopped, bracing for the inevitable blow. It didn't come. There was only the boy, watching it with a sadness the dog understood perfectly. Buddy stretched his neck, one long, vulnerable movement. He closed his eyes, and gave Leo's hand, which lay limply on the concrete, a single, cautious, wet lick. It was hot. The lick was hot. It was the warmest feeling Leo had felt in months, maybe years. It was warmer than the weak sun that couldn't penetrate the clouds. It was warmer than the thin blanket on his bed. It was warmer than any meal he had ever eaten in that cold, angry house. The light touch of the dog's tongue on his skin was a shock, like static electricity, but it wasn't painful. It was real. It was a signal. It said, I am here. It said, I see you. The small, simple gesture shattered everything. It shattered the charm of the cold concrete. It shattered the indifference of the passing cars. It silenced the ghostly screams of his aunt and uncle. It was a small act of pure, desperate kindness, one abandoned soul reaching out to another. A strange, unfamiliar sensation blossomed deep in Leo's chest. It started small, a tiny ember, and then spread, driving the chill from his bones. It crept up his neck and into his face. And for the first time that day, no, the first time that entire week, Leo smiled. It wasn't a wide smile. It wasn't the wide, careless smile of the girl across the street with her ice cream. It was a small smile, fragile, trembling, and hesitant, just a tiny crack in the fortress of her sadness. But it was real. Her face, so accustomed to frowning or holding back tears, wasn't sure what to do with the sensation, but her muscles obeyed. The corners of her mouth curved upward. In that moment, on that gray, forgotten sidewalk, everything changed. Two lonely souls, a boy treated like a stray dog and a stray dog treated worse than garbage, found the only thing that mattered in that indifferent world. They met. They sat there for a long time, the boy and the dog. The world continued to pass by. Cars honked. The adults continued walking, their faces glued to their screens, oblivious to the miracle that had just happened at their feet. They didn't see the treaty that had just been signed. They didn't see the alliance that had just been formed. They didn't see that a king had just met his knight. Leo slowly, very slowly, raised his hand. The dog flinched, waiting for the blow. But the blow never came. Leo placed his fingers gently on the dog's matted head, right between the ears. Buddy froze. And then, leaning in just a fraction of an inch, he let out a sigh, a breath of tired air that said it all. Leo had a secret. He had a friend. He had Buddy. And Buddy had him. They didn't know yet. They couldn't grasp what was coming. They didn't know that this simple bond, this impossible friendship forged in neglect and cemented by a single act of kindness, was about to be tested in the most brutal way. They didn't know that inside that cold house, a conflict was brewing, a conflict involving leftover food, simmering anger, and an act of shocking cruelty. They didn't know that their new friendship was about to be pushed to the breaking point. And they had no idea that this same bond, this loyalty between a forgotten boy and an abandoned dog, would be the only thing capable of saving a man's life, and, in doing so, changing their world forever. But all of that was yet to come. For now, on the cold concrete, there was only the warmth of a hand, the rough fur of a loyal friend, and the first true smile Leo had shown in a long time. The battle was about to begin, but for the first time, Leo wouldn't fight it alone. If you believe this boy and his loyal dog touched your heart, click enjoy so more people can see this story. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss what happens next. And tell us where you're watching from comments below. That small, fragile moment of warmth on the cold concrete was never meant to last. It was a borrowed second, stolen from a life that demanded suffering. The silence was broken, not by traffic, but by a sound that made Leo's entire body stiffen. Leo! Get in here, now! The voice was a roar, filled with impatience and anger. It cut through the air like broken glass. It was Uncle Jonas. Leo flinched, pulling his hand away as if burned. The smile vanished, instantly erased, replaced by the familiar mask of silent fear. Buddy, the dog, knew that sound too, the sound of an angry man. The mutt backed away instantly, his confidence shattered by the sudden violence in the air, and disappeared into the shadows of the alley, leaving Leo alone again. Truly alone. For Leo, the cold sidewalk was freedom. Home was prison. He stood slowly, his legs stiff, and walked toward the front door that represented the end of all hope. Each step was heavy. Entering that house was worse than the cold outside, because the cold inside had a voice and hands. The moment he opened the door, the smell hit him. It was a wave of stale beer, old grease from a dozen frozen meals, and the cloying, artificial scent of cheap cherry air freshener that couldn't quite mask the stench of neglect. The sound hit him next, a game show, blaring from a television so large it dominated the small, cluttered living room, the sound of cheering and fake buzzers echoing off the filthy walls. There they were. His guardians. His family. Uncle Jonas was sprawled in a stained brown armchair, his enormous belly hanging over the waistband of his sweatpants. He held the remote in one hand and a slice of pizza in the other, his eyes glued to the blinking screen, grease dripping onto the shirt he hadn't changed in 3 days. On the couch, buried in a nest of blankets and discarded shopping bags from stores Leo was never allowed to enter, sat Aunt Sandra. Her nails were long and painted vibrant colors, but her hair was greasy and pulled back in a messy bun. She wasn't watching the show, she was staring at the glowing screen of her smartphone, her thumb scrolling endlessly, an expression of profound boredom and contempt on her face as she ignored the world around her. They were surrounded by filth. Not the dust of an old house, but the filth of laziness. Half-empty soda cans sweated on the wooden floor, crumpled bags of chips, and stacked pizza boxes, 3 of them, covered every available surface. They ate hot, fresh pizza, the smell of pepperoni permeating the air, a scent Leo could only smell from afar. For a full minute, Leo simply stood in the doorway, invisible again, waiting to be recognized. Finally, Uncle Jonas looked away from the TV, narrowing his eyes as if Leo himself were a nuisance on the screen. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask where he was. "What are you doing standing there, staring like an idiot?" Uncle growled, gesturing with his pizza slice. "You think this pigsty cleans itself? We're already done. Clean it up." Aunt Sandra sighed loudly, as if she were bothered by the interruption, but she didn't take her eyes off her cell phone. Leo looked at the pile of greasy paper plates, the mountains of sauce-covered napkins, the half-eaten crusts they hadn't bothered to finish, food they'd wasted that was better than any meal he'd ever had. This was his job. He wasn't their nephew, he was their servant. He didn't speak. He knew he shouldn't. Saying okay was an answer. Saying anything was an invitation for more anger. He just nodded, a tiny, jerky movement, and walked silently toward the mountain of trash, his heart sinking back into that familiar cold, dark place. The warmth of the dog's lick already seemed like a distant dream. It took Leo 20 minutes to clean up their mountain of gluttony. He picked up the greasy paper plates, careful not to let the puddles of pepperoni grease spill onto the carpet. He stacked the empty, sticky pizza boxes, his stomach churning violently at the sight of the half-eaten edges they'd left behind, more food than he usually received in a day, which he was forbidden to touch. He gathered up the sweaty soda cans and bagged them, the smell of the feast making him dizzy with hunger. He had to drag the heavy garbage bag, nearly half his weight, through the kitchen and out the back door, into the now pitch-black backyard. As he tossed the bag into the overflowing trash can, a cold, biting rain began to fall, soaking his thin t-shirt in seconds. He ran back inside, shivering, wiping the dirty rain from his face. His aunt and uncle didn't move. They were monuments of laziness, bathed in the flickering blue light of their separate screens. He waited in the kitchen doorway, silent, knowing he shouldn't ask, but his stomach felt like it was devouring itself. Finally, after 5 full minutes, Aunt Sandra sighed, a sound of deep irritation, as if she'd been asked to move a mountain. Without taking her eyes off her phone, she simply pointed a long acrylic nail at the microwave. "Your dinner is on the counter," she muttered irritably. "Don't make a mess. And we already started the dishwasher, so you'll wash that plate by hand." Leo approached. It wasn't dinner. It was an insult. On a chipped and stained china plate sat a single, pale, lukewarm hot dog. It rested on a slice of dry, crumbly white bread. That was it. No ketchup. No fries. No glass of milk. Just the one piece of grayish-looking processed meat they deemed worthy. He carried his plate to the small, cold kitchen table, sitting alone under the harsh hum of the fluorescent light. He studied his food. He was hungry. Hunger was a sharp pain behind his ribs. He picked up the hot dog, the stale bun crumbling slightly in his fingers. He was about to take a bite, but then he froze. He heard a faint sound. A scratch. He looked up at the kitchen window above the sink. It was streaked with rain, and the dark backyard was barely visible beyond. But through the glass, illuminated by the kitchen light reflecting off the humidity, he saw 2 desperate little eyes. It was Buddy. The dog stood right where the trash cans were, soaked to the bone, his fur plastered to his skeletal body. He was shaking so violently that Leo could see it even through the distorted glass. Buddy was staring at the kitchen window, his head tilted, drawn by the smell of pizza waste and the light. He let out a tiny, pathetic whimper, a sound barely blocked by the glass, a sound that went straight to Leo's heart. Leo looked down at the pathetic hot dog in his hand. Then he looked back at Buddy, who was shivering visibly in the cold, damp darkness. His own hunger evaporated, replaced instantly by a wave of overwhelming, burning empathy. Buddy was colder. Buddy was hungrier. And Buddy was his single friend. He couldn't eat. He wouldn't eat. That single piece of food wasn't just food anymore. It was a message. It was proof. It meant, I see you. You are not alone. His heart was pounding. He glanced quickly into the living room. The TV was blaring a commercial, and they were both distracted. This was his chance. Quickly, with trembling hands, Leo grabbed a paper napkin from the holder. He wrapped the entire hot dog, the only real protein, the only real flavor he'd find that day, in it. He didn't just wrap the hot dog, he wrapped his hope, too. He tucked the small, warm bundle deep into his jeans pocket, pressing it against his leg. He then went to the sink, rinsed the completely untouched plate, and placed it in the drainer. He had a plan. He just needed to wait for the perfect moment to sneak back outside to his ally waiting in the rain. He didn't know that this small act of sacrifice was about to unleash a storm of cruelty he couldn't even imagine. He was an enemy soldier, trapped behind enemy lines. The kitchen was a well-lit no-man's land, and the living room was a sniper's nest. He knew he couldn't just walk out the back door, that would be instant execution. He had to wait. So he did the only thing he was allowed to do, he turned invisible again. He slipped silently from the sink toward the hallway that led to his cold basement room, his footsteps lighter than dust. His plan was simple: pretend to go to his room, wait until they were completely absorbed in the show, and then use the cover of the next loud commercial to sneak back out the back door. His hand instinctively covered the small, warm lump in his pocket. That hot dog felt like 1,000 pounds. It looked like a glowing ember, a sign of his betrayal that his uncles must surely be able to see through his jeans. He waited. Every second felt like an agonizing hour. The fake laughter from the TV show felt like mockery. The clock above the stove wasn't just ticking, it was a time bomb counting down. He could picture Buddy out there, shivering, soaking wet, probably thinking Leo had forgotten him. The thought sent a new wave of desperate urgency through him. Then, her moment arrived. A car commercial burst onto the television, louder than the show itself, filled with explosions and screams. At the same moment, Aunt Sandra muttered something about the bathroom and got up from the couch, disappearing down the hallway in the opposite direction. Uncle Jonas was alone. He let out a loud belch, fascinated by the cars flashing on the screen. Now. It had to be now. Leo moved. He wasn't a boy, he was a shadow. He crept from the darkness of the hallway back to the kitchen, keeping his body low. He didn't dare breathe. The kitchen floor was a minefield of creaking tiles. He avoided the one near the refrigerator, the one that always betrayed him. He walked past the table. He was free. His hand reached for the cold, metal handle of the back door. Freedom! He could already feel the cold rain on his face, see the gratitude in Buddy's eyes. His fingers began to turn the handle. And where the hell do you think you're going? The voice tore through the air, cutting through the sound of the commercial, freezing Leo's blood in his veins. It was Uncle Jonas. Leo froze, his hand gripping the doorknob. He didn't turn around. He couldn't speak. His throat closed up completely, the lie he'd prepared, just checking the trash, dying before it could be said. He had been spotted. The predator had been watching the entire time, pretending to be distracted by the television, waiting for his prey to make a mistake. I asked you a question, boy, the voice growled, closer now. Leo heard the heavy creak of the recliner as his uncle shifted his massive weight and stood. The floorboards vibrated under his heavy footsteps. Leo was a mouse, and the hawk was descending. Slowly, Leo turned around. Uncle Jonas stood in the kitchen doorway, filling it completely, blocking the only escape route to the rest of the house. The warm blue light of the TV was behind him, transforming him into a huge, frightening silhouette. But Leo could see his eyes. They weren't just angry, they were lit by a cruel spark, the excitement of catching someone doing something wrong. You've already eaten your dinner, Uncle Jonas said, his voice deceptively low. There's nothing for you out there. Unless. His eyes narrowed, moving from Leo's terrified face to his thin arm, to the hand that was still, stupidly, protectively clamped in the pocket of his jeans. You've been acting a little weird all night, his uncle hissed, taking a heavy step forward. He pointed a thick finger at Leo's pocket. Are you stealing, boy? Are you stealing food from me house? No. Leo finally choked out, the word barely above a whisper. It's nothing. Oh, nothing? Jonas scoffed, his face contorted. Then you don't mind showing me. Take your hand out of your pocket. Leo couldn't move. He shook his head, a tiny, desperate gesture. It wasn't just a hot dog. It was a promise. It was for Buddy. Take your hand. When Leo didn't move, Uncle Jonas's patience snapped. With a speed that terrified Leo, his uncle lunged forward and grabbed Leo's small wrist, yanking his hand from his pocket. Let me go. Leo screamed, backing away, but the grip was like a steel trap. With his other hand, Uncle Jonas reached his thick fingers into the boy's pocket and pulled out the contents. The small, napkin-wrapped package fell to the dirty linoleum floor. The napkin fell open, and the single, pale hot dog rolled accusingly across the floor, coming to a stop right next to Uncle's boot. There was a terrible, deafening silence. The only sound was the game show, cheering nonstop in the other room. Uncle Jonas looked at the hot dog. Then, slowly, he looked back at Leo, his eyes now completely cold. And then, he smiled. It was the worst smile Leo had ever seen. That smile on Uncle Jonas's face was slow, oily, and terrifying. It was the smile of a predator that had finally, satisfyingly, cornered its prey. He looked down at the pathetic hot dog, then back up at the terrified boy who was still trying to wrestle free. Well, he hissed, his voice dripping with false discovery. Stealing. After everything we do for you. I knew you were a bad seed, just like your mother. It's not stealing. Leo cried, the tears finally breaking free, hot and stinging as they ran down his cheeks. It was my dinner. You gave it to me. It was mine. Your dinner? Jonas laughed, a short, harsh, barking sound that had no humor in it. The food I pay for? In my house? Nothing in this house is yours, boy. You earn your keep. You are a charity case. What I give you, I can take away. The noise had finally drawn Aunt Sandra back from the hallway, her phone still held aloft in her hand, her face pinched with irritation. What is all this screaming, Jonas? I'm trying to relax. What did he do now? Her eyes darted down, seeing the hot dog on the floor, seeing the defiant tears on Leo's face. She understood instantly. Uncle Jonas's eyes lit up, as if a truly terrible idea had just occurred to him. He was putting the final pieces together, the boy caught sneaking outside, the stolen dinner. His gaze drifted past Leo to the rain-streaked glass of the back door, toward the dark, wet yard where Buddy was waiting. He was taking this, Jonas said slowly, his voice laced with disgust, this garbage. He let go of Leo's wrist just long enough to bend down and snatch the soiled hot dog from the floor. He was taking it to that filthy animal, wasn't you? He hissed, shoving the hot dog near Leo's face. That flea bag much you keep playing with by the trash cans. Leo froze. This was worse than being caught stealing. He had exposed Buddy. He had led the monsters right to his only friend. No! Leo sobbed, a desperate, useless lie. He's just hungry. Please. That was the wrong answer. Hungry? Uncle Jonas roared, his face turning a deep, blotchy purple. The explosion was sudden and violent, shaking the entire room. You dare to steal the food I put on this table, food I paid for with my hard work, to feed a diseased street rat? Leo, seeing the rage in his eyes, made a desperate, brave lunge for the hot dog. Please. It's mine. Don't. Jonas shoved him. With the flat of his massive hand, he shoved Leo hard in the chest, sending the 7-year-old stumbling backward, his small body crashing hard against the refrigerator. The impact rattled the magnets on the door. Uncle Jonas held the dirty hot dog up between his thick thumb and forefinger, pinching it as if it were the most disgusting thing he had ever touched. That mutt doesn't eat. Here, he screamed, his voice echoing off the tile. Aunt Sandra just watched, a cold, thin smirk playing on her lips. She didn't move to stop him. She added fuel to the fire. Show him what we do with trash, Jonas, she said quietly, her voice cold as ice. That was all the permission he needed. Uncle Jonas turned, walked the 3 steps to the kitchen trash can, the very same one Leo had dutifully emptied of their pizza boxes just an hour before, and jammed his foot down hard on the pedal. The lid flew open, revealing the dark, empty bag inside. No! Leo screamed, scrambling forward from the floor. Please. Don't. He's so hungry. Please. It was too late. Looking Leo dead in the eyes, defying the child's desperate plea, Uncle Jonas opened his hand and contemptuously dropped the single hot dog into the dark, empty bin. He let the metal lid slam shut with a final, metallic clang. It was the sound of a jail cell door locking. It was the sound of the end. There was nothing but the echo of the metal, and Leo's choked, desperate sobs. There, Jonas said, wiping the filth from his hands onto his dirty shirt. Food is in the trash. Right where it belongs. And that's exactly where that dog, and anyone who feeds it, belongs too. That final, metallic clang of the trash lid echoed in Leo's ears. It was the sound of total, absolute defeat. For a single, agonizing second, Leo just knelt on the cold linoleum floor, the tears streaming down his face, his small body shaking with a profound, hopeless sob. It was over. The food was gone. But the image of Buddy, shivering and starving alone in the dark, still waiting for him in the rain, broke through his despair. He couldn't give up. Buddy didn't know the food was gone. He was still waiting. Desperate, fueled by a loyalty that the adults in the room could never understand, Leo scrambled forward. He lunged toward the trash can. He didn't care that it was dirty. He didn't care that his uncle was watching. He would dig it out. He would wipe it off. He would save it. And oh, he cried, his small hand reaching for the foot pedal. It's still good. Give it back. He never even touched it. Before his foot could find the pedal, a heavy, massive hand clamped down hard on the back of his t-shirt, bunching the thin fabric and pulling it tight against his throat, choking him. Uncle Jonas lifted him, half dragging, half carrying him, clear off his feet as if he weighed nothing. Oh, no you don't, the uncle hissed, his voice now terrifyingly calm and cold. I told you. That is trash. Please. Leo gasped, his feet scrambling uselessly against the floor, kicking at the air. I'm sorry. I'll be good. Please, Uncle Jonas. Don't. You want to act like an animal? Jonas snarled, ignoring his pleas, dragging him across the kitchen floor. You want to steal food from my family just to eat out of the garbage with a rat? He was pulling him toward the back door, the very door Leo had tried to escape through moments earlier. Aunt Sandra just watched from the living room doorway, her arms crossed, a look of complete, bored satisfaction on her face. He needs to learn, Jonas, she said, her voice sharp as a needle. Tough love. Oh, I'll show him love, Jonas grunted. He reached the back door and, still holding Leo tight with one hand, he yanked the doorknob. The door flew open, revealing the pitch-black, stormy night. The wind and the cold, stinging rain instantly flooded the warm kitchen, whipping Leo's hair across his face. You love that mutt so much? Jonas roared, his rage returning, louder than the wind. You want to eat garbage with that filthy rat? He didn't wait for an answer. He needed the world to be balanced, and to him, the balance was this: a boy who loved trash belonged in the trash. With a final, violent grunt, he shoved Leo out of the house. Leo went flying. His small body was completely airborne for a second before he landed, slipping on the wet concrete step and crashing painfully onto the muddy grass just outside the door. He gasped, the cold, wet shock stealing his breath. He looked up, desperate, the rain already plastering his thin t-shirt to his skin. His uncle stood in the doorway, a massive, dark silhouette against the warm kitchen light, looking down at him like he was nothing. Like he was the very trash he spoke of. Since you love the garbage so much, you can sleep in it. And don't bother knocking. Aunt Sandra's voice echoed shrilly from behind him. Maybe a whole night out there will finally teach you some gratitude for the roof we put over your ungrateful head. And with that, Uncle Jonas slammed the door. The sound was a definitive, deafening crack that split the night. Leo heard, even over the sound of the pouring rain, the sharp, metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. He was locked out. He scrambled back to the door, ignoring the mud in the pane, banging his small, cold fists against the solid wood. No! Uncle Jonas! Let me in! Please! I'm sorry! It's cold! Aunt Sandra! Please! There was no answer. The kitchen light clicked off, plunging the entire yard into total, terrifying darkness. They had left him. Leo collapsed against the useless door, his body sliding down the wood until he was a small, sobbing heap in the mud. He was cold, he was hungry, he was defeated. He had failed everyone. He had failed himself. And he had failed his only friend. And then, through the darkness and the driving rain, he heard a soft whine. A wet nose nudged his hand. Buddy, hearing the commotion, had come running from the alley. He, too, was shaking, soaked, and starving. But he wasn't leaving. He pressed his cold, wet body against Leo's, licking the tears and the rain from the boy's face. Here is the development of Topic 7. This scene is the lowest emotional point in the story, focused entirely on the suffering of the protagonists to generate maximum sympathy and indignation from the audience. Leo pushed himself up from the mud, his small hands sinking into the cold, thick ooze. The door was a solid, silent, final wall of wood. They were gone. They hadn't been bluffing. They had actually done it. They had locked a 7-year-old child out, in a storm, as easily as taking out the trash they believed he was. Buddy whined again, a high-pitched sound of distress, pushing his wet head desperately under Leo's arm, seeking a comfort that Leo couldn't give. The rain was intensifying now, no longer a drizzle, but a driving, icy downpour. It was cold and merciless, like tiny needles stabbing his skin through his thin, soaked cotton t-shirt. The backyard was hopeless. It was a dark, muddy prison yard. Banging on the door again would only satisfy his uncle. With a final, choked sob, Leo realized that staying by the locked door was pointless. His only hope, the only tiny, flickering ember left in his frozen body, was that another human, any other human, a kind stranger driving by, a neighbor peering through their blinds, someone, would see him and help. Come on, buddy, he whispered, his voice cracking, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely speak. He wiped the rain and tears from his face, leaving only a streak of mud behind. Together, the two abandoned souls trudged through the ankle-deep mud, around the side of the dark house. They had to pass the living room window. Through the rain-streaked glass, Leo could see the flickering blue light of the television. They were still in there. Warm. Dry. Safe. They were watching their show, feet away from the suffering child they had exiled, completely oblivious, or worse, completely indifferent. They finally reached the sidewalk. The front street. Somehow, this was worse. Here, under the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights, the abandonment felt public. Official. It was a declaration to the entire sleeping town that this boy, and this dog, did not matter. The street was dead. The rain hissed as it hit the black asphalt. Any other night, cars might pass, but in this storm, the world was inside. The world was safe. Every house on the street was dark. Everyone was asleep, warm and secure in their beds, while a 7-year-old boy and a starving dog stood alone on the curb, soaked to the very bone. The cold was no longer just a feeling, it was an attack. Leo's clothes were heavy with water, clinging to his skin like an icy shroud, stealing every last bit of warmth his small body tried to produce. His shivering was uncontrollable now, violent spasms that racked his entire frame. He couldn't feel his fingers. He couldn't feel his toes. Buddy huddled against his leg, letting out a high-pitched, painful whine, the sound of an animal in true physical distress. And the hunger. It was no longer just an ache in his stomach, it was a fire. A cold fire, burning a hollow, agonizing hole inside both of them. They had been denied food. Now they had been denied shelter. They were starving. They were freezing. They were completely and utterly alone. Leo collapsed onto the wet concrete curb, right next to a city trash can. The irony was a cruel, final joke. He pulled his knees to his chest, but there was no warmth to be found. This was it. This was the lowest point. This was the end. He looked down at the little dog who had pressed himself desperately against his side, trying to share the tiny, failing warmth of his own small body. "I'm sorry, buddy," Leo cried, the words torn from his throat by the wind. "I'm so sorry. I had it. I had the food for you, and I lost it. I failed. I'm so sorry." As if he understood every word, the dog just whimpered and pushed closer, licking the cold, muddy tears directly from Leo's cheek. Leo wrapped his thin, numb arms around the dog, pulling Buddy into his lap, burying his face in the dog's soaking wet, matted fur, trying to block the wind. They were two small, desperate engines, shivering violently, trying to share the last fading embers of their body heat, huddled together on a forgotten sidewalk, completely helpless against the dark and the storm. They huddled there for what felt like an eternity, the world reduced to nothing but the sound of the driving rain and the violent, uncontrollable chattering of Leo's own teeth. He had buried his face so deep in Buddy's wet fur, trying to find one last molecule of warmth, that he didn't even hear the footsteps at first. Buddy did. The dog, ever vigilant, lifted his head from Leo's lap. A low, terrified growl rumbled deep in his chest. Headlights swept the street, blindingly bright. It wasn't a police car. It was a long, black, luxury sedan that pulled over sharply to the curb about 50 feet away, its tires slicing through the puddles. The passenger door flew open, a man jumped out, and the car sped off into the night almost before his feet hit the pavement. This man was alone. And now, he was walking in the storm. He was a man who did not belong on this street, in this weather, at this hour. He wore an expensive dark suit, which was already soaking through, and he held a smartphone pressed hard against his ear, shielding it uselessly from the rain with his other hand. He wasn't just walking, he was pacing, stomping back and forth on the sidewalk, his voice a sharp, angry bark that cut right through the howl of the wind. "I don't care what the interest rate is," the man's sharp voice yelled into the phone. "If we don't close that merger by midnight, the entire Asian market deal collapses. Move the money now, David. I don't care how." This was Mr. Martins. A man drowning in millions, walking straight toward a boy drowning in the rain. He was so completely absorbed in his world of numbers and deadlines, a world of unimaginable wealth and stress, that he almost tripped directly over the small, shivering heap on the sidewalk. He stopped short, finally seeing the dark lump he had nearly kicked. "What the?" he muttered, lowering the phone from his ear. And then he saw him. For one terrible, electrically charged, silent moment, the two worlds collided. The bank president, his face a mask of absolute stress and corporate power, looked directly into the desperate, terrified eyes of a 7-year-old boy who was soaked, caked in mud, crying, and desperately clinging to a dying stray dog. Leo looked up, his heart stopping completely. A man. A person. An adult. He saw me. Hope, so violent and painful it almost choked him, surged through Leo's frozen body. He stopped. He sees me. He's wearing a suit. He's rich. He's not like my uncle. He will help. Mr. Martins froze. His phone buzzed angrily in his hand, but for a second he ignored it. He saw the boy. He saw the absolute misery. He saw the shivering, pathetic dog. His face, hard and angry just a moment before, softened. A visible pang of pity, real, human pity, crossed his features. This was wrong. This was a child. In a storm. He opened his mouth. He almost reached into the coat pocket where his wallet was. But just as he did, his phone didn't just buzz, it shrieked, the loud, intrusive ringtone of his primary assistant. The deal. The millions. The merger. He looked down at the freezing, desperate child. He looked at the screaming phone. He made a choice. In the split second that defines a man, the bank president rationalized it all. It's not my business. His parents must be in that house right there. He's probably just being punished, sitting on the step. I can't get involved in domestic disputes. I have real problems. This deal is worth billions. The brief warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by the cold panic of the merger. He pulled his expensive wool coat tighter around himself, a coat warmer than Leo had ever felt, and put the phone back to his ear. "David, stop calling me," he snapped into the phone, and he took a wide step around the small huddle on the curb. He walked right past them. He didn't just ignore them. He saw them, weighed their survival against his bank account, and chose the money. Leo watched him go. The man's polished, expensive black shoes clicked angrily on the wet pavement, getting faster and faster until he rounded the corner, his voice already shouting about assets and liquidation before the wind swallowed him whole. He was gone. This was the final blow. This was worse than Uncle Jonas. This was a stranger, a man who looked kind, who had the power to help. He had seen Leo's suffering, looked him directly in the eye, weighed his life, and decided Leo wasn't worth the time. Leo's last tiny, flickering ember of hope died. It went out completely. No one was coming. No one would ever help. He dropped his head, his body completely numb, surrendering himself and his dog to the cold and the dark. Leo didn't move. He had gone past shivering, his body was just numb, a small, discarded thing waiting for the cold to take him, closing his eyes, trying to pretend he was somewhere else. The world had abandoned him. The man was gone. The street was silent again, save for the relentless, pounding drum of the rain. But then, a new sound cut through the storm. It wasn't a voice. It was a gasp. A horrible, wet, choking sound that snapped the air. It was followed by the sharp, metallic clatter of a smartphone hitting the hard pavement. Leo's head snapped up, his heart suddenly pounding for a new reason. Down the street, just past the corner Mr. Martins had turned, the man was no longer walking. He had stopped. He was staggering. He had dropped his precious phone, the one that held the billion-dollar deal. The small, bright screen glowed uselessly on the dark, wet sidewalk. Mr. Martins was clutching his chest with both hands, his knuckles white. His face, which moments before had been red with the stress and anger of his phone call, was now a pale, terrifying, deathly gray. He tried to take another step, to call for help, but his legs buckled. He gasped for an air his lungs couldn't find, his eyes wide with a new kind of terror. It was not the terror of losing money. It was the terror of losing everything. In that second, all his billions, all his mergers, all his power, meant nothing. The massive, crushing stress he had prioritized over a child's life had just cashed its final check. His heart, overworked and overloaded, was exploding in his chest. He looked around wildly, desperately, searching for help. For a car. For a neighbor. For anyone. The street was empty. The houses were dark. The storm had driven every other living soul inside. Except one. His terrified, bulging eyes found the curb he had just left. His gaze locked with Leo's. In that final, horrifying, cosmic moment of irony, the bank president understood. The only person on this entire, dead street who knew he was dying, was the invisible, worthless boy he had actively refused to save just 30 seconds earlier. He tried to raise a hand. He tried to speak the boy's name, to beg for the help he had denied. Only a choked, gurgling sound came out. And then, Mr. Martins collapsed. He fell like a sack of expensive clothes, crashing hard onto the wet pavement and rolling slightly into the gutter, where the dirty rainwater immediately began to wash over his unconscious face. He was still. Leo just stared, frozen, paralyzed by sheer terror. This was a nightmare. The man. The rich man. The man who had ignored him, was dying. He was dying right there on the concrete, just yards away. Leo wanted to run. He wanted to hide. Part of him, the part that his uncle had built, whispered, "He let you freeze. Let him go. Why should he help?" This was the man who had looked him in the eye and walked away. This was the world's justice. But Leo wasn't his uncle. And he wasn't Mr. Martins. He was just a child. And he couldn't just sit there and watch someone die. "Help!" Leo whispered to the empty street, his voice too small and too cracked to carry. "Somebody! Help! Please, help him!" But nobody could hear him. The storm swallowed his tiny voice whole. The street was empty. The man was dying. And Leo was just a terrified, frozen, helpless little boy. Leo was paralyzed. The world had frozen solid. The man was dying. The rain was washing away the last of his life, and Leo was just a 7-year-old boy, too small, too cold, and too scared to do anything but watch the horror unfold. "Help!" He cried again, the word stolen by the wind before it left his lips. "Somebody, please." No one was coming. But he was wrong. Someone was there. Someone who wasn't paralyzed. Someone who hadn't given up. Buddy. The dog, who had been a shivering, pathetic bundle of matted fur in Leo's lap, suddenly sensed the shift. He felt the critical change in the air, the moment life tipped over into death. This small, starved animal, who had been shown nothing but kicked ribs, screamed curses, and the sting of thrown rocks his entire life, this dog who had just been denied even a single scrap of stolen food by the cruelty of mankind, possessed more raw, pure humanity than every adult Leo had ever known. While the human boy froze, the animal acted. With a sudden, explosive energy that defied his starving body, Buddy sprang from Leo's lap. He hit the wet pavement, his paws scrambling for purchase, and let out a single, sharp, piercing bark. It wasn't a whine. It was not a plea. It was an alarm. "Buddy, no! Come back!" Leo cried, thinking the dog was finally abandoning him, running away from the terror. But Buddy wasn't running from the storm. He was running into it. He sprinted down the dark sidewalk, a soaking wet streak of loyalty, past the glowing, discarded smartphone, and straight toward the corner where Mr. Martins lay unmoving in the gutter. Just then, headlights. Finally. A single police cruiser, rolling slow, windows wipers working overtime as it patrolled the dead-end neighborhood during the storm. The car was checking the street and was just about to turn around, completely oblivious to the man dying just yards away. They would never see him. Buddy saw the car. This was the only chance. The small, worthless, filthy mutt ran directly into the middle of the street, planting himself squarely in the path of the oncoming squad car, his small body illuminated like a ghost in the high beams. Screech! The cruiser slammed on its brakes, the heavy tires hissing on the wet road, stopping just inches from the little dog. The officer inside, startled and angry, leaned on the horn. "Boya Hank! Get out of the road, you stupid dog," the driver shouted through the closed window. But Buddy didn't budge. He braced his small, shaking body against the rain, looked directly at the officers, and barked. He barked with a desperate, frantic, intelligent intensity that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't an angry bark. It was a scream. It was a plea. "Help! What is wrong with that dog?" the officer in the passenger seat muttered, reaching for his radio. "Just run him off." But then the dog did something incredible. He barked once more directly at the car, then turned and ran 20 feet toward the dark corner, stopped, looked back to make sure they were watching, and ran back to the car, barking furiously. He wasn't just barking. He was telling them. He was refusing to leave. He was hurting the 2-ton police car. The officer in the passenger seat leaned forward, squinting. "Wait. Steve, look. Is he trying to show us something?" "I'll be damned," the driver said, grabbing the spotlight control. "That dog wants us to follow." The officer hit the switch for the main takedown lights, and a massive, blinding white beam from the roof of the car instantly flooded the street, cutting through the rain like a laser, illuminating the dark corner exactly where the frantic dog was barking. And they saw him. It wasn't a pile of trash. It was a man. Face down in the gutter. The second the high beams confirmed the shape was a man, the scene exploded into frantic action. "My God! He's real," the driver, Officer Steve, yelled. Both cops burst from the cruiser, ignoring the rain and their half-finished coffee, their training taking over. Officer Steve reached the body first, sliding in the wet gutter, his knees hitting the asphalt. He put 2 fingers immediately on Mr. Martin's neck, searching through the rain and the cold skin. "He's got a pulse," he shouted to his partner. "It's thready. He's alive. Barely. Call it in. Possible massive cardiac arrest. We need EMS here, now." His partner was already on the radio, the controlled, professional panic of his voice cutting through the night. 7 Adam 12 to dispatch. "We have a man down, unresponsive, code 3. Requesting immediate EMS and fire rescue at the corner of." Buddy, his primary job complete, stayed near the scene, barking intermittently, pacing anxiously, as if to say, "Hurry up. Hurry up. Do your job." Leo watched the entire thing, still huddled on the curb, a frozen spectator to the life-or-death drama his dog had set in motion. He was terrified, but he was also amazed. Buddy did that. He saved him. Within 3 minutes, an eternity in the freezing cold, the night screamed with new sirens, a sound that was no longer lonely, but a sound of hope. An ambulance and a fire engine truck rounded the corner, flooding the dark street with pulsing red, white, and blue lights that reflected off every wet surface, turning the rainy nightmare into a chaotic light show. Paramedics spilled out of the ambulance, their movements fast, sharp, and practiced. "He's in V-fib," one yelled, ripping open Mr. Martin's expensive shirt. They got the paddles. Clear. A violent jolt shocked the man's body on the wet pavement. They were working, fighting the rain, fighting the clock, barking orders. They got him stabilized, just barely. They had a rhythm. They skillfully transferred him to the gurney. He was dying, but he wasn't dead. The dog had won. The paramedics were lifting the gurney, sliding him into the back of the ambulance. Let's go, let's go." Just as they were about to close the doors, Mr. Martin's eyes fluttered open. He was conscious, but barely. He was disoriented, his gaze darting wildly between the paramedic's face and the flashing red lights inside the ambulance. He was alive. He remembered the phone, the impossible stress, the crushing pain, and the fall. Then, through the open ambulance doors, past the chaos of the police officers and firefighters, his gaze found the curb. He saw him. The 7-year-old boy. Still there. Soaked, muddy, his lips blue from the cold, shivering so violently it looked like a seizure, holding the stray dog that had barked. He remembered. With a sickening, sudden clarity, Mr. Martins remembered walking right past them. He realized, in that moment, what had happened. The very souls he had deemed worthless, the ones he had left to freeze, had just saved his life. "Sir, you need to stay calm, we're taking you in," the paramedic said, trying to secure his oxygen mask. But Mr. Martins, with a surge of adrenaline, ripped the mask away. His eyes were locked on Leo. He was too weak to shout, but he had to make them understand. He lifted one trembling, heavy hand. His finger, covered in rainwater and gutter filth, pointed directly at the curb. "Them," he rasped, the word a painful, desperate gasp. Officer Steve, who was coordinating the scene, leaned in closer. "What about them, sir? Did they do this to you?" Mr. Martins shook his head, desperate. "No," he whispered, his eyes begging the cop to understand the truth. "The boy, the dog. They saved me. They saved me." And then his eyes rolled back, and he passed out again. "He's crashing. Go! Go! Go!" the paramedic yelled to the driver. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the siren screamed to life as the vehicle raced away, taking the millionaire to the hospital, his life hanging by a thread saved by a dog. Officer Steve was left standing alone in the rain, the sound of the siren fading into the night. He stood there for a long, quiet second, the man's dying words echoing in his head, "The boy. The dog. They saved me." He looked at the flashing lights of his own cruiser. And then he turned and really looked at the curb. He didn't just see a kid in the rain. He saw a 7-year-old child, dressed in a paper-thin t-shirt and jeans in a freezing storm, covered in mud, clearly suffering from hypothermia, holding a stray. He realized, this wasn't just a witness. This was the hero. And this hero was also a victim. His mission had just completely changed. He slowly began to walk toward Leo. Officer Steve, a 10-year veteran of the force, had seen the worst of humanity. He had seen cruelty and violence. But what he was looking at now, he didn't understand. He looked over at the dark, silent house. Then he looked at the curb. A hero. The man had called the boy a hero. But the hero was a 7-year-old child, covered in mud, who looked like he was 5 minutes away from freezing to death. His mission had completely changed. This was no longer just a medical call. This was a rescue. He walked slowly toward the curb, his movements gentle, deliberate. He didn't want to frighten them. As he got closer, the little stray dog, Buddy, lifted his head from Leo's lap and let out a low, weak, protective growl. Even now, starving and frozen, the dog was still protecting his boy. "It's okay," Officer Steve said, keeping his voice soft, holding his hands up slightly. "It's okay, boy. You did good. You're both safe now." He knelt in the gutter, ignoring the cold water soaking through his own uniform, so he could be eye level with the terrified child. "Son," he said gently. "My name is Officer Steve. That man you just saved, they are taking him to the hospital. He's going to be okay. And it's because of you." Leo just looked at him, his entire body shaking in violent, uncontrollable spasms. His lips were blue. He was too cold to even speak. Officer Steve saw it. This wasn't just cold, this was hypothermia. This kid was in serious danger. "Buddy," Leo chattered, his teeth clicking together, pointing at the dog. "Buddy helped." "I know he did," the officer said, his throat tight. He looked at the mangy, heroic stray. "You both did. Now we gotta get you warm. Both of you." In one swift movement, Officer Steve undid his own heavy, department-issued police rain jacket, the only warm, dry thing on the street, and draped it completely over Leo, wrapping the boy in it like a cocoon. It smelled like safety. Can Buddy come?" Leo whispered, terrified the officer would separate them. Officer Steve looked at the dog that had flagged down a patrol car to save a man's life. "Son," he said, "that dog doesn't ever have to leave your side again if I have anything to say about it." He opened the back door of his warm police cruiser. "Come on, heroes. Let's get you out of this storm." He carefully lifted the small boy, who was now wrapped in a coat 3 sizes too big, and set him gently on the back seat. Buddy, seeing Leo was safe, bounded right in after him, curling up instantly on the boy's lap, sharing what little warmth they had left, finally safe from the rain. Officer Steve closed the door and walked around to the driver's seat, the cold rain hitting his own unprotected shirt. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment, the sound of the radio crackling quietly, the heater blasting. He looked in the rearview mirror. The boy and the dog were just a huddled mass in his giant coat. Then, he looked at the dark house. The house where the lights were off. The house the boy had been locked out of. His face hardened. He picked up his radio. 7 Adam 12 to dispatch, he said, his voice low and angry. Go ahead, 7 Adam 12. Dispatch, the victim, Mr. Martins, is en route to St. Jude's. The witnesses and primary heroes are secured. It's a minor, age 7, and his dog. I am pulling them from the scene. The child is suffering from severe exposure and hypothermia. Copy that. Does the minor need an ambulance? Negative, the officer said, looking at the house again. But notify Child Protective Services. Tell them to meet me at the precinct. This is no longer just a medical call, dispatch. This is a felony child endangerment investigation. The residents at this address locked him out. He put the radio down, put the car in drive, and the police cruiser pulled away from the curb, its lights flashing, rescuing the heroes from the dark street, leaving the silent, guilty house behind. The next morning. The rain had finally stopped, but the sky was left a bruised, heavy, unforgiving gray. The front yard of the house was a swamp of thick mud and slick, dead leaves, bearing silent witness to the horrors of the night before. 2 official vehicles were parked at the curb, Officer Steve's police cruiser, and a plain black sedan belonging to Child Protective Services. Leo stood on the sidewalk. He was a different boy than the one who had collapsed here just hours earlier. He was clean, dry, and wearing a new sweatshirt and jeans provided by the precinct's emergency fund. He felt warm for the first time in memory. And beside him, no longer a stray, sat Buddy on a brand new leash, a gift from the officers at the station. Leo was not alone. He was flanked on one side by Officer Steve, and on the other by a kind-faced woman from CPS, who held a clipboard. They were here for the official investigation, and to retrieve Leo's few, meager belongings from the basement room. On the porch stood Uncle Jonas and Aunt Sandra. They were dressed now, but their faces were puffy from sleep and stressed. Their nervousness was hidden under a thick layer of false anger. They had rehearsed their story all morning. I am telling you, officer, Uncle Jonas was saying, his voice dripping with fake, practiced concern. The boy is a runner. He's troubled, always has been. We fell asleep, and he must have unlocked the back door and run off. We were sick with worry. We were about to call you ourselves. Aunt Sandra chimed in, clutching her bathrobe. We are the victims here. To have child services called on us, it's an insult. We feed him. We clothe him. He is an ungrateful. Her voice was cut short by the arrival of a third car. This car was different. It didn't just drive, it glided. It was a long, silent, midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom, a car that looked like it cost more than the entire neighborhood block. It pulled to a silent, heavy stop right in front of the house. The uncles stopped talking. All the air left their lungs. A driver in a crisp, black suit emerged from the front, walked silently around, and opened the rear passenger door. Slowly, painfully, Mr. Martins emerged. This was not the vibrant, angry man from the night before. He was alive, but only just. He was pale, almost gray, and looked 10 years older. He was wearing an expensive silk suit, but he moved with the fragility of broken glass, leaning heavily on the arm of a uniformed personal assistant or nurse who helped him stand. He had clearly, against all medical advice, checked himself out of the cardiac unit. He had business to attend to. The uncles froze. Their mouths dropped open. Their practiced lies died instantly on their lips. They weren't just looking at the man from the storm, they were looking at a ghost. A ghost they recognized from newspaper business sections and the plaques in the bank lobby. Aunt Sandra was the first to speak, her voice a horrified, strangled squeak. Oh, my God. Jonas. Jonas, look. That's him, isn't it? Uncle Jonas, a man who owed thousands on his credit cards and was 2 months behind on the mortgage payments for this very house, felt the cold, sick rush of blood drain from his face. His arrogance and his anger evaporated, replaced by pure, liquid terror. Mr. Martins, he stammered, his voice cracking. Mr. Harrison Martins? The president of Central City Bank? What are you doing here? Mr. Martins ignored the 2 villains on the porch. He didn't grant them a single glance. He weakly shrugged off his assistant's helping arm, forcing himself to stand on his own power. He took one painful, deliberate step toward the sidewalk. His eyes, filled with a new, profound clarity, were only on the 2 heroes standing next to the police officer, the small boy in the borrowed sweatshirt, and the loyal, stray dog standing guard at his feet. Uncle Jonas saw his entire financial future, the overdue mortgage payments, the maxed-out credit cards, the loans he had applied for, collapsing in front of his eyes. He had to pivot. He had to grovel. He forced a sick, oily smile onto his terrified face, taking a step off the porch. "Mr. Martins. Sir. What an honor to have you in our humble neighborhood," he gushed, wiping his sweaty palms on his bathrobe. We're just handling a small domestic matter here with the officers. This delinquent child, he's a pathological liar, sir. We are so sorry you are seeing this." Mr. Martins raised one, trembling hand. The gesture was weak, the movement of a man who had flatlined just hours earlier, but it carried the absolute authority of a king silencing his court. And it stopped Uncle Jonas mid-sentence. "You?" Mr. Martins rasped, his voice rough and quiet, amplified by the cold morning air. "You will be silent." He ignored Jonas and Sandra completely, as if they were nothing more than stains on the sidewalk. He took another painful, deliberate step until he was standing directly in front of Leo. He looked down at the boy, and then at the dog who sat faithfully by his side. Mr. Martin's eyes, which had been cold with stress and greed the night before, were now filled with a profound, raw gratitude, and a terrible, clarifying shame. He turned his head, looking directly at Officer Steve and the CPS social worker. "Officer," Mr. Martin said, his voice gaining strength with his conviction. "Last night, I was dying. Right there." He pointed a shaking finger at the gutter, at the exact spot. "The stress of $1 billion deal, it stopped my heart. I was dead." He then turned his gaze, now cold as iron, locking onto the two pale, shaking villains on the porch. "This boy," he announced, pointing clearly at Leo, "and this dog." He nodded to Buddy, "They saved my life. This dog," he emphasized, his voice rising, "this heroic animal, flagged down your cruiser when I was unconscious. This boy, this child who was freezing to death on that curb, is the only reason I am alive today." The CPS worker and Officer Steve exchanged a dark, final look. They now had the full picture. Aunt Sandra saw her entire life, the house, the car, the credit evaporating. She had to try the lie. He was outside, she faked, her voice suddenly high and shrill with manufactured shock. "Oh, that terrible boy. He must have snuck out after we found him sleeping and put him to bed. We told you, officer, he's a runner. He's uncontrollable." "That is a lie," Officer Steve said. His patience was gone. His voice boomed into the silence, an official judgment. "That is a provable, disgusting lie. I found this child on that curb at 10:45 p.m. He was soaking wet, unable to speak, and suffering from severe hypothermia. And the back door to this house was..." He paused, looking down at his notepad, deadbolted. "From the inside." He looked up, his eyes burning into Uncle Jonas. "He didn't run out. You threw him out. It was a misunderstanding." Jonas stammered, panicked, his eyes darting wildly between the cop and the bank president. "It was just a punishment. A normal punishment. We didn't mean for him to, we thought he'd just sit on the back step. He exaggerates." The CPS worker knelt down, putting herself on Leo's level. "Leo," she asked gently, "why did they lock you outside last night?" Leo, feeling safe for the very first time, surrounded by the police, the social worker, and the man he had saved, looked at his uncle, then looked at Mr. Martins, and he told the simple, devastating truth. "Because of Buddy," Leo whispered, his voice clear in the silence. I tried to give him my dinner. It was just one hot dog. Uncle Jonas saw me. He threw it in the trash. He yelled, 'That mud doesn't eat here.' And then, he threw me out too, and told me to go sleep in the garbage with him." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The social worker closed her eyes in pain. Officer Steve wrote furiously in his notepad, the pen tearing the paper. Mr. Martins just stared at the two uncles. He stared at these two greedy, pathetic, cruel humans who owed his bank thousands of dollars. They had lived off his money, and in their pathetic, petty cruelty over a single piece of meat, they had nearly cost him his life. "A misunderstanding?" Mr. Martins repeated, his voice now dangerously quiet, full of contempt. "You threw a child, my savior, into a deadly storm. Over scraps." He shook his head, looking at the house they lived in, and then back at them. "You are finished." Uncle Jonas turned sheet white. "Finished? What are you talking about?" he stammered, trying to find his arrogant footing and failing. "You can't just, it was a family matter. It was a mistake." "It was," Mr. Martin said, his voice pure ice. He didn't even bother looking at them as he spoke to his assistant. "Helen, call the legal department. Tell them to start immediate foreclosure proceedings on this address. Cite the delinquency clause. They are 2 months behind on their mortgage payments. He finally turned his dead eyes back to Jonas. You are terrible clients. You have 30 days to vacate my property. Foreclosure. Aunt Sandra shrieked, her fake composure finally shattering completely, revealing the desperate, greedy monster beneath. You can't do that to us. We'll be ruined. We'll be on the street. And you're lucky that's all that's happening, Officer Steve snapped, his patience completely gone. He stepped forward, pulling his handcuffs from his belt. Because it's much worse for you than just losing your house. He marched up the porch steps. Jonas and Sandra Miller, you are both under arrest. Arrest? Jonas bellowed, backing away toward his front door. For what? For starters, Officer Steve said, grabbing the uncle's wrist, spinning him around, and slamming his hands against the wall. Felony child endangerment. Willful neglect. And aggravated assault. You threw a 7-year-old child, your legal ward, into a deadly infectious storm. You locked the door. You're lucky we're not adding attempted murder to the list. As the second officer, who had arrived with CPS, cuffed a screaming, clawing Aunt Sandra, the CPS social worker stepped forward and put a protective hand on Leo's shoulder. And I am officially removing Leo from this home, effective immediately. You can't do this. Sandra screamed, thrashing as she was led in handcuffs toward the cruiser. He's lying. That little brat. You did this to us. You ungrateful little rat. You ruined us. But her voice was silenced as the cruiser door slammed shut, just as they had slammed the door on Leo the night before. Justice. Complete. The street went suddenly, beautifully quiet. The police cars drove away, taking the trash with them. Only the Rolls-Royce, the CPS sedan, and the heroes remained on the sidewalk. Mr. Martins let out a long, painful breath, the stress of the confrontation almost sending him reeling. His assistant rushed to steady him, but he waved her off. He looked tired, old, and weak, but he was alive. He walked over to Leo. Wincing in pain from his recovering heart, the billionaire slowly knelt down, lowering himself until he was eye level with the boy he owed his life to. He looked at the CPS worker. This boy, he said clearly, and this dog, they are the only reason I am breathing today. Money is no object. My lawyers will handle whatever paperwork you need. I want to take him. I want to ensure his safety. I want to give him everything. The CPS worker, seeing the profound, life-altering connection between the billionaire who owed his life to this child, knew this was the one miracle she would see all year. She smiled, and she nodded. Mr. Martins turned his full attention back to Leo. Leo, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. What those people did to you, it is unforgivable. But the world is not them. A boy with a heart this big, he gestured to the sacrifice Leo made, and a dog. He said, reaching out and scratching Buddy's ear, a dog this brave and this loyal, you do not deserve to live like this. You deserve the entire world. He gestured to the open, waiting door of the Rolls-Royce. You are both, he said, looking at Leo and then at Buddy, coming with me. You will never be cold again. You will never be hungry again. And you, he said directly to the heroic dog, can have any food in the world you want. Steak. Chicken. Whatever you want. And I promise you, you will never eat from the trash again. Leo, who had been silent and strong through the entire arrest, finally broke. The fear, the cold, and the despair of the last 12 hours vanished, replaced by a relief so total that he couldn't hold it back. He cried, but for the first time in his life, they were tears of pure joy. He didn't just nod. He lunged forward and hugged the billionaire, wrapping his small arms around the neck of the man he had saved. The final scene. We see the Rolls-Royce gliding silently down the highway, leaving the cursed neighborhood forever. Inside, Buddy, the filthy mutt, the vermin, is sitting calmly on the plush, cream-colored leather seats, looking out the window like a king. And Leo is sitting next to him, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, safe, warm, and finally, loved. If you believe this boy and his loyal dog got the justice they deserve, show your support by hitting that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another story with a powerful lesson. Let us know what you thought of this story, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below.